this badge.
Do you remember, General? Or are we just unofficial casualties in your memory that you've crossed out?
Spectre. Eleanor? Impossible.
A veteran's jacket was mocked as old until a general recognized the patch and froze. The fluorescent lights of the Fort Braxton commissary cast harsh shadows across the aisles as Captain Eleanor Vance moved quietly through the produce section, her weathered hands carefully selecting vegetables for the week ahead. At 52, Eleanor carried herself with the understated dignity of someone who had seen more than most, her steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun that emphasized the lines time had etched around her eyes. Her olive drab military jacket, faded from years of wear, drew immediate attention from two young lieutenants browsing the nearby deli counter. The jacket's fabric was soft with age, creased at the elbows and frayed at the cuffs, with a ghost-like outline over her heart, where a unit patch had once been proudly displayed. "Look at that relic," Lieutenant Andrew Sterling whispered to his companion, Lieutenant Kevin Foster, his voice carrying just loud enough to be heard. "Someone should tell her the war's over." Foster snickered, adjusting his perfectly pressed uniform. "Probably picked that up at a surplus store. I bet she's never even seen combat." Eleanor's fingers paused momentarily over a bag of apples, but she didn't turn around. She had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when the people throwing stones had no idea what they were aiming at. The two lieutenants, fresh from the academy and sharp with the arrogance that came from having never been tested, continued their commentary as Eleanor moved through the store. They saw an older woman in a worn jacket, someone who didn't fit their image of what a veteran should look like. What they couldn't see was the slight limp in Eleanor's right leg, caused by shrapnel fragments that doctors had deemed too dangerous to remove. They couldn't know about the sleepless nights when memories of a classified mission in Tehran 22 years ago would surface without warning. Most importantly, they had no idea that the faded outline on her jacket had once held a patch so classified that its very existence had been erased from official records. Eleanor approached the checkout line, her movements economical and purposeful. Behind her, the whispered comments continued, but she focused on the simple task at hand: buying groceries, maintaining the quiet routine that had become her anchor in civilian life. The young clerk at the register, Corporal Olivia Chang, looked up from her scanner with the weary expression of someone working a second job to make ends meet. "Military discount?" she asked automatically. "Yes, please," Eleanor replied quietly, reaching for her military ID. It was then that Lieutenant Sterling decided to escalate his entertainment. "Excuse me," Lieutenant Sterling said, stepping closer to Eleanor's position in the checkout line. "I couldn't help but notice your jacket. That's quite a vintage piece you've got there." Eleanor turned slowly, her gray eyes meeting Sterling's with the kind of steady gaze that had once stared down enemy combatants in hostile territory. "It serves its purpose," she replied simply. Foster joined his companion, emboldened by what he perceived as an easy target. "We were just wondering about your service record. That jacket looks like it's seen better decades." Corporal Chang looked up from the register, sensing the tension building in the interaction. She had seen enough military personnel pass through her line to recognize when a situation was about to escalate. "I served," Eleanor said, her voice remaining level despite the obvious disrespect. 23 years active duty." "Really?" Sterling's tone dripped with skepticism. "What unit? What campaigns? because that jacket doesn't look like it's been anywhere more dangerous than a costume shop. Eleanor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. Some service records are classified. I'm sure you understand the concept of operational security. Foster laughed outright. Classified, come on, lady. What were you, a cook, a clerk? Real soldiers don't hide behind classified when asked about their service. The conversation was beginning to draw attention from other shoppers and staff. Eleanor could feel eyes turning toward them, could sense the familiar weight of judgment from people who saw only what was visible on the surface. Ma'am, I'll need to see your military ID for the discount. Corporal Chang interjected, hoping to diffuse the situation by returning to routine procedures. Eleanor handed over her ID, but Sterling wasn't finished. Let's see what that says. I bet it's some rear echelon support position. No wonder she won't talk about it. Chang scanned the ID and frowned at her computer screen. Ma'am, I'm showing some issues with verification. The system says your records are restricted access. What does that mean? Foster demanded, leaning over the counter. Sounds like someone's trying to game the system. Eleanor's hands remained steady as she waited for Chang to work through the bureaucratic maze that had become her life since leaving active duty. She had encountered this problem before her service record was so deeply classified that even routine verification became a complex process. I'll need to call my supervisor, Chang said apologetically. This level of classification requires special authorization. Sterling's eyes lit up with malicious satisfaction. Aha, I knew it. She's probably some stolen valor case trying to scam military discounts. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Eleanor felt the familiar weight of carrying secrets that she could never share, of bearing the burden of service that officially never happened. Around them, other customers had stopped their shopping to watch the drama unfold. I understand this is complicated, Eleanor said to Chang, ignoring the lieutenants entirely. Take whatever time you need. But Sterling wasn't content to let the matter drop. He pulled out his phone and began recording. This is perfect. We've got someone trying to fake their way into military benefits. This is going straight to the base commander. Eleanor's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to Sterling's face. For just a moment, something dangerous flickered in her gaze, a glimpse of the operator. She had once been the woman who had completed missions that officially never existed. You might want to be careful about making accusations you can't prove, she said quietly, her voice carrying an undertone that made Chang step back involuntarily. The situation in the commissary continued to deteriorate as Sterling's video began circulating among base personnel through social media and messaging apps. Within hours, Eleanor Vance had become an unwitting internet sensation, portrayed as a potential fraud attempting to exploit military benefits. Look at this, Foster said, showing his phone to anyone who would listen. We caught her red-handed trying to scam the system. Probably bought that jacket at a thrift store. Eleanor completed her transaction in silence, accepting the temporary denial of her military discount without complaint. Chang had been unable to resolve the verification issue, and Eleanor knew from experience that explaining the complexities of classified service records would only make things worse. As she walked toward the exit carrying her groceries in a worn canvas bag, Eleanor could hear the whispered conversations following in her wake. The story was already growing in the telling by the time it reached the third retelling. She had supposedly claimed to be a Navy SEAL, a Green Beret. and a CIA operative all at once. But not everyone on base was buying the narrative that Sterling and Foster were selling. Captain Alex "Hammer" Hayes, a grizzled infantry veteran with 3 combat deployments, was reviewing the video when something caught his attention. He paused the footage and enhanced the image, focusing on the faded outline on Eleanor's jacket. "Son of a bitch," he muttered, recognizing the distinctive shape. He had seen that patch configuration only once before during a joint operation briefing that had been classified so far above his pay grade that he'd been required to sign additional non-disclosure agreements just to be in the room. Hayes immediately called First Sergeant Isabella Rossi, a woman whose institutional knowledge of special operations was legendary throughout the base. "Bella, I need you to look at something," Hayes said, forwarding the video. "Tell me what you see on that woman's jacket." Rossi studied the image for several minutes before responding. "Jesus, Alex, where did you get this? Some lieutenants are claiming she's stolen valor. They've been spreading it all over the base." "Those idiots have no idea what they're messing with," Rossi said grimly. "That patch outline, I've only seen it once, and that was in a briefing so classified I'm probably not supposed to remember it exists." Word began to spread through the senior NCO network, the informal but powerful communication system that really ran the military. Seasoned veterans who had served in various special operations units started taking a closer look at Eleanor Vance, and what they saw made them increasingly uncomfortable with the narrative being pushed by the junior officers. Major Ben Carter, the base operations officer, was reviewing the incident report when his phone rang. The caller was a former colleague from his days in military intelligence. "Ben, I heard you got someone on your base named Eleanor Vance. Tell me you're not letting some punk lieutenants harass her." "You know her?" Carter asked, suddenly alert. "I know of her. And if she's who I think she is, those lieutenants are about to learn a very expensive lesson about assumptions." Carter immediately pulled Eleanor's personnel file, but found only the standard information available to his clearance level. Her service record showed 23 years of active duty with multiple commendations, but the details of her assignments were redacted or simply listed as classified operations. Meanwhile, Eleanor had returned to her small apartment off base, where she lived quietly among civilians who knew nothing of her military service. She had learned to compartmentalize the daily indignities that came with carrying secrets that could never be shared, but the public nature of today's humiliation stung more than usual. She sat in her kitchen, still wearing the faded jacket, and looked at the framed photograph on her counter, 5 soldiers in desert camouflage, their faces young and confident. 4 of them had died in Tehran, their sacrifice classified so deeply that their families had never learned the true nature of their final mission. Eleanor touched the faded outline on her jacket, remembering when it had held the distinctive patch of Spectre Group, a unit so secret that its very existence had been denied by 3 successive administrations. She had worn that patch with pride right up until the day a 4-star general had ordered all records of their operations sealed for reasons of national security and political deniability. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Saw the video. Some of us know better. Stay strong." It was followed by another, "Hammer Hayes here. Don't let the kids get you down. Real recognizes real." Eleanor smiled slightly, the first genuine expression of warmth she had shown all day. The old-timers knew They might not know the details, but they recognized the signs of someone who had served in the shadows, who had carried burdens that officially didn't exist. Tomorrow, she would return to the commissary for the items she hadn't been able to purchase today. And tomorrow, the truth would finally begin to surface. The crisis reached its peak the following afternoon when Eleanor returned to the commissary, determined not to let the previous day's humiliation prevent her from completing her shopping. Word of her return spread quickly through the base's informal communication networks, and by the time she entered the store, a small crowd had gathered. Lieutenants Sterling and Foster were waiting for her, their phones ready to record what they expected to be another opportunity to expose what they believed was fraud. They had spent the morning rallying support among other junior officers, convinced they were performing a service by protecting military benefits from abuse. "Well, well," Sterling announced loudly as Eleanor entered. "Look who's back, ready to try your scam again." Eleanor ignored them, moving purposefully toward the produce section. But this time, she wasn't alone in facing the harassment. Several senior NCOs had positioned themselves strategically throughout the store, their presence a silent statement of support. "Ma'am," First Sergeant Rossi approached Eleanor respectfully. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday's incident. Some people don't know when to show proper respect." Sterling overheard the comment and bristled. Respect for what? She won't even tell us what unit she served with. Real veterans aren't ashamed of their service. "Real veterans," Captain Hayes interjected, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned his rank through combat leadership, "understand that some service can't be discussed in a grocery store by people without appropriate clearances." The tension at the commissary was palpable as junior and senior personnel faced off over Eleanor's legitimacy. Foster, emboldened by what he saw as support from other lieutenants, decided to escalate further. "This is ridiculous," he declared. "If she's so legitimate, why can't she prove it? Why are her records sealed? What's she hiding?" Eleanor finally turned to face her accusers, her gray eyes holding a weight that made several of the junior officers step back involuntarily. "Some things are sealed to protect operations that are still ongoing," she said quietly. "Some things are classified to protect people who are still alive, and some things are buried because the truth would be inconvenient for people who made difficult decisions." "That's convenient," Sterling shot back. "Hide behind classification when you can't prove your claims." It was at that moment that the commissary's automatic doors opened with a soft whoosh, and General Robert Maxwell entered with his aide-de-camp. The four-star general was making an unscheduled visit to the base and had decided to stop by the commissary to observe the daily life of his personnel. Maxwell was a tall, broad-shouldered man whose uniform was pressed to perfection, every ribbon and star gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He carried himself with the practiced authority of someone who had commanded thousands of soldiers across multiple theaters of operation. The general's entrance caused an immediate hush throughout the store, as personnel recognized his rank and presence. But Maxwell's attention was focused on something else entirely: the woman in the faded olive drab jacket standing near the produce section. His eyes locked onto the ghost-like outline on Eleanor's chest, and his face went pale. Maxwell stopped walking so abruptly that his aide nearly collided with him. "Sir," the aide asked, concerned by the general's sudden stillness. Maxwell didn't respond. He was staring at Eleanor with an expression of recognition, shock, and what appeared to be profound regret. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where his own ribbons told the story of a distinguished career built on decisions that had sometimes required sacrificing the recognition of others. "Captain Vance," Maxwell said, his voice carrying across the now silent commissary. Eleanor turned at the sound of her name, and when she saw the general, her posture straightened into the bearing of a soldier recognizing a superior officer. But there was something else in her eyes, a mixture of respect and accusation that spoke to a complicated history between them. "General Maxwell," she replied, her voice steady, but carrying undertones that only someone with their shared history could understand. Maxwell began walking toward her, and as he moved, every person in the commissary could see the weight of recognition and responsibility settling on his shoulders. The junior officers who had been harassing Eleanor suddenly looked uncertain, sensing that they had stumbled into something far beyond their understanding. When Maxwell reached Eleanor, he did something that shocked everyone present. He came to attention and rendered a formal salute to the woman in the faded jacket. The sight of a four-star general saluting Eleanor Vance sent shock waves through the commissary that rippled outward like concentric circles from a dropped stone. Every person present, from the junior lieutenants who had been mocking her to the senior NCOs who had suspected her significance, stood frozen in stunned silence. Maxwell held his salute with the precision of a West Point graduate, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. The weight of 22 years seemed to hang in the air between them, along with the ghosts of decisions made in classified briefing rooms and the shadows of operations that officially never happened. Eleanor returned the salute with equal precision, her movement sharp and professional, despite the years that had passed since she'd last worn a uniform with rank insignia. When they both dropped their hands, Maxwell's voice carried clearly through the silent store. "Captain Eleanor Vance, Spectre Group Operation, Nightfall, Tyran Province, 2002, he said formally. "I should have done this 22 years ago." The words hit the assembled crowd like a physical force. Spectre Group was a name whispered in intelligence circles, a unit so classified that most people with top-secret clearances had never heard of it. Those who had knew it only as a designation for operations that required complete deniability. Lieutenant Sterling's phone, which had been recording the encounter, slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. Foster's face had gone white as he began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. "General," Eleanor said quietly, "that's not necessary." "It is absolutely necessary," Maxwell replied, his voice carrying the authority of command and the weight of long-carried guilt. "Captain, I was the one who signed the order to classify your unit's records. I was the one who made the decision to bury Spectre Group's existence for political deniability." He turned to address the crowd that had gathered, his voice rising to ensure everyone could hear. This woman and her team completed one of the most dangerous and successful operations in modern military history. They prevented a terrorist attack that would have killed thousands of American civilians. And when political pressure required that their mission be denied, I was the one who signed the order that erased their service from official records. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she remained silent as Maxwell continued his public confession. Captain Vance lost 4 team members in Tyran Sergeant Michael Chen, Corporal Sarah Rodriguez, Specialist David Kim, and Private First Class Jennifer Walsh. They died heroes, and their families were never allowed to know the true nature of their sacrifice, because I decided that political convenience was more important than honoring the dead. The general's voice cracked slightly as he spoke the names, each one a weight he had carried for over 2 decades. I have regretted that decision every day since I made it. Captain Vance, I'm here to offer you the opportunity to set the record straight. Eleanor looked at Maxwell for a long moment, her gray eyes reflecting the internal struggle between the desire for recognition and the habits of secrecy that had defined her post-military life. "What are you proposing, sir?" she asked. "Full reinstatement of your service records, public recognition for you and your team, the honors and decorations that should have been awarded 22 years ago." And he paused, his voice growing stronger, "a formal apology from the United States Army for the injustice that was done to you and your fallen comrades." The commissary remained absolutely silent as Eleanor considered the offer. Around them, the junior officers who had mocked her stood in various states of shock and growing horror at their behavior. The senior NCOs watched with expressions of respect and vindication, having suspected all along that there was more to Eleanor's story than met the eye. "I don't need recognition for myself," Eleanor said finally, "but my team, they deserve to have their names spoken with honor. Their families deserve to know that their children died serving their country, not in some training accident or classified mishap." Maxwell nodded solemnly. "It will be done. I give you my word as an officer and as the man who wronged you 22 years ago." Eleanor extended her hand, and Maxwell shook it with the gravity of a treaty signing. "Then I accept, General, not for me, but for Chen Rodriguez Kim and Walsh. They've been silent long enough." The climactic moment concluded with Maxwell turning to address the crowd directly, his voice carrying the full authority of his rank and position. "Let this be a lesson to everyone present," he said, his gaze sweeping across the junior officers who had harassed Eleanor. "You never know who you're standing next to. You never know what sacrifices the person beside you has made for your freedom. Respect is not earned by the newness of someone's uniform or the shine on their boots. It's earned through service sacrifice and the quiet dignity of those who have borne burdens you cannot imagine." Lieutenant Sterling, his face burning with shame, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I want to apologize. We had no right to question your service or treat you with such disrespect." Eleanor looked at the young officer with something approaching compassion. "You didn't know," she said simply, "but now you do. The question is what you'll do with that knowledge." As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with conversation about what they had witnessed, Maxwell remained with Eleanor, the two veterans standing together in the fluorescent-lit commissary like old soldiers sharing a moment of understanding that transcended rank and time. "Thank you, General," Eleanor said quietly. "Not for me, but for them." "It's the least I can do," Maxwell replied. "And Captain, it's long overdue. 3 months after the commissary incident, the Armed Forces Recognition Ceremony took place in the base's main auditorium, packed with military personnel, veterans, and family members who had traveled from across the country. Eleanor stood on the stage, wearing the same faded olive drab jacket, but now it bore the restored patch of Spectre Group, a black shield with silver wings that had been recreated from classified archives. General Maxwell presented her with the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and 3 Purple Hearts that had been approved but never awarded due to the classified nature of her service. But the most meaningful moment came when he read the names of her fallen teammates, each one receiving posthumous recognition for their sacrifice in Operation Nightfall. Sergeant Michael Chin, Corporal Sarah Rodriguez, Specialist David Kim, and Private First Class Jennifer Walsh gave their lives to prevent a terrorist attack that would have killed thousands of innocent Americans. Maxwell announced to the assembled crowd, their families were told they died in a training accident. Today, we honor the truth of their sacrifice. Eleanor's speech was brief and focused entirely on her team. I didn't serve alone, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. Everything we accomplished together. These medals belong to all of us. The impact of Eleanor's story extended far beyond the ceremony. Lieutenant Sterling and Foster had both requested transfers to different units, unable to face the daily reminder of their behavior. But before leaving, they had each sought out Eleanor to apologize personally and ask for guidance on becoming better officers. Eleanor had begun conducting informal mentoring sessions for junior officers, sharing lessons about leadership, respect, and the importance of understanding that every person in uniform had a story worth honoring. Her quiet wisdom and unassuming manner had begun to change the culture of the base, one conversation at a time. The commissary incident had become legendary throughout the military community, shared as a cautionary tale about the dangers of making assumptions and the importance of treating all veterans with respect. Eleanor's faded jacket had become a symbol of hidden service and quiet heroism. Most importantly, the families of Chen, Rodriguez, Kim, and Walsh finally learned the truth about their loved ones' deaths. Their names were added to memorial walls, their stories told with pride instead of hidden in classified files. Eleanor continued to shop at the same commissary, but now she was greeted with the respect and recognition that had been 22 years overdue. This story demonstrates how true heroism often goes unrecognized and how the courage to speak truth to power can finally bring justice to those who served in silence.